Authoritarianism has metastasized in the Republican Party and is manifesting itself in a number of different ways that we can't afford to lose track of. One of the biggest examples is this deranged notion of absolute presidential immunity, which is at the heart of Donald Trump's legal defense in a number of the cases before him. Simply put, Trump and his attorneys have claimed that the Constitution puts Trump above the law as an ex-president. And again, that authoritarian impulse is so attractive that even non-Trump Republicans like Nikki Haley refuse to condemn it and seem to be flirting with it. And that question is currently potentially being considered by the United States Supreme Court, which currently has a regressive 6-3 conservative supermajority. So the stakes are pretty high. Thank God we have Democrats, and one such Democrat is Congressman Jamie Raskin, who torches the idea of absolute presidential immunity in about a minute or two. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, again, with all the fascism that is exuding, pouring forth from the Republican Party, again, we can't afford to get distracted and lose track of things. And so this particularly sinister claim that ex-presidents are above the law, that that's some sort of privilege we give to them, like they're the king of the United Kingdom or something like that, is really gross. And it's super gross regardless of the political affiliation of a president. I say this as a proudly partisan progressive Democrat. I don't want any Democrat now, in the past, in the future, to be above the law. If a Democratic president commits crimes while in office, once he is no longer or she in office, they should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But I'm not in a cult, which is why it's easy for me to say that. Republicans and allegedly principled conservatives should absolutely commit to the same standard. If a Republican president or a president that they like commits crimes while that president is in office, then they should enthusiastically support their prosecution after the fact. And yet when Trump is involved, Republicans seem to sing a different tune. I want to play a clip here of Alena Habba, who is one of Donald Trump's attorneys. Basically, again, she's trying to articulate, presidential immunity, Trump gets a blank check. We don't need to worry about this.
The Supreme Court is looking at presidential immunity, which means it's a protection for presidents so that they can actually operate without being afraid of being prosecuted, persecuted, and attacked when they come out of office. But what has happened? He's been prosecuted, persecuted, and attacked, and they're ignoring presidential immunity. So finally, the Supreme Court is taking it up on January 6th case and going to look at it really hard and say, look, we have no business attacking somebody who was within his scope of presidency, who has come in, was doing his job, was protecting the elections, was doing the things that a president should do. Instead, they call him an insurrectionist because they can't beat him in the polls.
Well, we're not the only ones calling him an insurrectionist. A judge out of Colorado, as a matter of fact, Judge Sarah Wallace, officially deemed Donald Trump an insurrectionist. So that's actually a legal opinion in the eyes of the American justice system. But again, note the culty language there. You know, we need presidents are supposed to get absolute immunity so they can do their jobs and not have to worry about being prosecuted for crimes. Well, as we've discussed, yes, there are certain accommodations granted to the president as well as other high officials so that they cannot be the subject of frivolous prosecution. It would destabilize the country if you can just drag the president in front of court any damn time you please, right? They're supposed to be the nation's chief executive. So yes, a certain degree of presidential immunity is expected, but that's not what this is. And Donald Trump isn't president. So again, before I play some of the next clips, I just want to remind you. So this is an opinion which came from Judge Tanya Chuin, who is the presiding judge of one of Donald Trump's many court cases, specifically the idea that he attempted to defraud the country and overturn the results of an election fraudulently. She was asked by Trump's attorneys, hey, just toss this thing, okay? He was a president, and, you know, during January 6th and in the events leading up to January 6th and his attempt to overturn the election, he was the sitting president. So, you know, basically he gets a get out of jail free card. And I want to read you some excerpts just to remind you. Defendant, which is Trump, contends the Constitution grants him absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions performed within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility while he served as president of the United States, so long as he was both not impeached and convicted for those actions. No court or any other branch of government has ever accepted that claim, and this court will not so hold. Whatever immunities a sitting president may enjoy, the United States only has one chief executive at a time, and that position does not confer a lifelong get-out-of-jail-free pass. Former presidents enjoy no special conditions on their federal criminal liability. Defendant Trump may be subject to federal investigation, indictment, prosecution, conviction, and punishment for any criminal acts undertaken while in office. Read you some others. Won't go through the whole thing, but she cites the example again of President Washington, who created so many of the traditions we associate with the role. And she argues that even he believed at the very beginning that it was important for presidents and ex-presidents not to be above the law, that rule of law came first and foremost. And then the last thing I'll say is, this is from her opinion again, nothing in the Constitution's text or allocation of government powers requires exempting former presidents from that solemn process. Neither the people who adopted the Constitution nor those who have safeguarded it across generations have ever understood it to do so. Trump's 4-year service as commander-in-chief did not bestow on him the divine right of kings to evade criminal accountability that governs his fellow citizens. No man in this country, not even the former president, is so high that he is above the law. Now, again, you would think in the sane world that that's an uncontroversial notion, particularly in the United States of America, particularly among so-called constitutional conservatives, principled conservatives who fear government overreach and the evasion of the rule of law. And yet again, Donald Trump manages to subvert the entire right wing and their political proxies, the Republicans. As long as it's a Republican or a Republican that they like, then yes, you should be above the law according to the right. And again, it's so bad that even Nikki Haley, a Republican presidential candidate who pitches herself as a reasonable, principled conservative, who's running against Donald Trump, right? She wants to ostensibly take his place and become, the presidential nominee. Even she won't commit to this idea that absolute presidential immunity is insane. So let's play the clip and we'll unpack it.
So let me ask you, speaking of Trump, he has claimed absolute immunity in his defense to the election interference case. Is that your view? Do you believe a president has absolute immunity for anything that happens while they're president?
I'm going to let the courts figure that out. I mean, the last thing you're going to see me do is weigh in or learn the details about any of his court cases because I can't follow 91 charges, and I'm not going to.
That makes total sense, but let me just ask you on the principle. Forget his case. Do you think that a president of the United States, that if you get elected president, you would have absolute immunity for anything you did while you were president?
Well, I think the court issues are, do you have immunity when you're president? When you're not president, at what point does that line fall? I'm going to let judges decide that. I don't know where the line falls. President Trump's going to have to defend himself.
Absolute moral cowardice, a complete absence of principle. That's what I mean. And we're about to play another clip. This one is, of course, the culmination, the best part of it. But I just want to say Nikki Haley is an example. If Nikki Haley, a so-called principled conservative, can't commit to this, it really puts the nail in the coffin that there is no such thing as a principled conservative in high office in the Republican Party. There's not a single elected Republican official who is a principled conservative, because they would be able to say with one voice, no, of course not. Sitting presidents are not above the law, let alone former presidents. And it doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat on sheer principle. The idea of an absolute immunity conferred to the chief executive is anti-American, it's anti-democratic, it's straight out of the monarchy of the United Kingdom from which we emancipated ourselves. It's absolutely gross. It doesn't matter if it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Absolutely not. She could have answered like that, and she wouldn't have even had to opine about the details of the various cases against Trump. But Nikki Haley won't commit to that. There is no such thing as a principled conservative in the modern Republican Party in terms of elected office, because a Democrat would never hesitate to answer that question. You ask AOC, you ask Joe Manchin, ask anybody, hey, do you think presidents, sitting presidents or former presidents are above the law or should be above criminal prosecution if they commit crimes? Every Democrat would say, hell no, of course not. And that's why a Democrat is the president of the United States. Complete cowardice from the Republican Party. But we have an actual constitutional scholar, unlike Alena Habba, Jamie Raskin, Democratic congressman. He is one of the best rhetoricians and scholars that the Democrats have. This is what he has to say about the idea of absolute presidential immunity, and he puts it so damn well.
To deal with what are very easy legal questions. I mean, when Donald Trump says he has immunity for whatever he does as a former president. You mean he can actually go out and shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and he can't be prosecuted? He can rape people, as we know he might have some predilection to do, and he can't be prosecuted because he's immunized against everything, conspiracy to overthrow the government, steal documents and so on. I mean, it's absurd. The other argument, of course, is double jeopardy, which is even more laughable. The idea that because you go through impeachment and a Senate trial, it would be double jeopardy to try you for things that might, interact with or overlap with charges that were brought before. The Constitution itself, in Article 1, Section 7, Clause 3, I think it is, specifically refutes that. It says that if you're being impeached, that extends only to removal from office and disqualification from office, but prosecution and trial at law will lie nonetheless later on. So it's an explicit refutation of that argument. I mean, that is a one-paragraph dismissal of that absurd argument.
He's so good at what he does. He's one of the best. Again, smarter, more educated, infinitely superior on a cognitive and moral level than any elected Republican, and that's simply the case. The abdication of, again, the so-called principled conservative notion of, again, separation of powers and checks and balances, this idea that no person is above the law, that the rule of law is paramount. The Republicans are openly retreating from it. Now, they'll want to hold Democrats and members of marginalized community to that. Of course, the Constitution and the law should apply to them. Of course. Is it a Democrat president? Okay, then no, a Democratic president, of course, not above the law. If it's a Republican former president, well, then we got to let the courts decide. Absolutely despicable. Let me know what you think in the comments about Trump's argument and Nikki Haley's cowardice on the subject and Jamie Raskin's complete refutation of it. Let me know what you think.